Floriculture is one of the fundamental concepts of development, whether it is domestic, commercial, or purely ornamental. Cultivation of a plant for ornamental purposes actually refers to floriculture. The concept is to convert a wasteland, an area where we cannot cultivate or we have not cultivated any plants, into an area where we have decorative plants which have a wonderful ornamental value, either commercially or for their own personal benefits being cultivated. The question is, when has this concept initiated? It is said that when botanists, floriculturists surveyed natural habitats, they found that in nature, wonderful and beautiful plants are available almost anywhere and everywhere. And what they did was try to domesticate these so that at their homes or in the vicinity of their locations, their mere presence will make that area beautiful. The question is, can we cultivate any plant for ornamental purposes, or can we maintain a plant for as long as we want it for ornamental purposes, or any plant and every plant has a basic pattern? Ordinarily, the selection of an ornamental plant is essentially related to what sort of beauty it has, and that beauty in turn is governed by the conditions in which it can grow. We have seen that under different conditions, we have different plants available. Automatically, this is governed by the habitat in which this plant has a potential to survive. We have seen that there are areas where plants are found to be cultivated almost throughout the year. That is, starting from the month of January, and they continue to bear wonderful flowers up to December. But there are areas where certain seasons, especially autumn and winter, are those periods where flowers or the flower yielding plants cannot ordinarily survive. That means any plant which needs to be or which is to be cultivated for ornamental purposes is essentially governed by the conditions in which it is to be cultivated. This concept has categorized plants into those groups which are determined by the conditions of habitat, by the conditions of the environment, and by the conditions of other physical features which govern their development. And once this has been determined, question arises as to when we should create or when we should start initiation of a creation of an ornamental garden. Again, here we can start right from the month of January and continue up to the month of December, because plants which are ornamental in their value can produce flowers almost throughout the year. But the preparation of a garden is again governed by the conditions in which we want to prepare it. That means whenever an area is to be categorized as an ornamental area, we have to first determine what the geographical conditions, what the climatic conditions, and what the habitat conditions are dominant in that area. So it means that in a tropical area, right from the month of January up to the month of December, we can start preparing a garden for cultivation of ornamentals. But if we look at temperate areas, if we look at alpine and subalpine areas, there we will find that usually during winter we cannot even touch the ground in which we want to cultivate ornamentals. This concept has automatically categorized ornamental plants into two distinct groups: those which can survive under tropical conditions throughout the year, and those which can survive under temperate conditions, wherein they are further categorized into two subgroups. One we call as winter annuals, that means those which are sown in the month of November and December, and they flower in the month of April, May, and continue up to July. And this is then followed by summer ornamentals which are sown in the month of June and which continue to bear flowers up to the month of November or sometimes even December. That automatically has categorized these ornamentals into different groups. Then, once we have identified the area on the basis of its physical and climatic conditions, and then tried to design a garden, an ornamental section, one has to actually first of all analyze as to how he can create a garden. In this case, we have to proceed systematically, where each step in turn is governed by specific factors required for that. For example, when we talk about how to start creation of a garden, that means we are trying to see as to how many sections we will create in that garden. Will it be simply a lawn? Will it be simply a section where you can grow only flowers? Or will it be a section where we want to cultivate not only flowers but sometimes vegetables, sometimes even fruits? Now, question is, in that case we have to create sections in that garden. That means a section will be for ornamentals, a section will be for vegetables, and a section will be fruits. But here the question is, can a garden sustain three distinct types of plants in it? Those which have ornamental value, those which have food value and fruit value, and those which have vegetable value. It is seen that ordinarily one can initially start this. However, as soon as fruits start maturing in the form of trees, shrubs or bushes, their growth, their survival pattern automatically neglects the growth of flowering plants as well as the growth of vegetables. It automatically means that we have to actually prefer sectorization, wherein one section of the lawn can be purely for ornamental plants, one section for vegetables, and another section for fruits. Then, once these sections are created, one must first of all try to create an artificial design which is considered to be a basic and fundamental requirement for any of such practices. That means he can take the size of the ground in which he wants to create a garden, and then in that size, as per his own requirements or as per as the demands, he would try to create sections. That means he will first try to create a lawn itself. That means a section wherein he has to simply create a plain surface on which he will grow grasses, normally referred to as cynodon dactylon, which will remain green almost throughout the year. And then once this section has been created, he will try to locate sites where beds, that means sections in which ornamental plants can be grown, will be created. Now, this can ordinarily be seen if we have a look at any of the established gardens like this. That means in this garden we have a section which is referred to as lawn, we have a section which is referred to as flowering beds, a section which is referred to as a rosary, and a section which is referred to as a greenhouse. Now, question is, once we try to establish these sections, what are the fundamental factors for these? For example, if we want to create a section for a rosary, now imagine, a rose actually is one plant, yet we want to create a section referred to as a rosary. It is essentially based on the features which the rose actually reveals. There will be color variation, there will be size variation, there will be productive variation in the plant itself, as well as the survival pattern of the roses. That means if we create a separate bed for a roses, in that we will have plants bearing flowers almost throughout the season, and then in these flowers we will find variation in colors, variation in size, variation in shape, as well as variation in durability. Then, if we try to create beds for flowers, now why do we need to create many beds? We have usually in one lawn a bed number ranging from 1 to sometimes even 100. And once we analyze that, we find that each bed is having in it different types of flowers. Now question is, why is there a need of cultivating each plant separately? I'll quote an example. If we try to cultivate poppy and then cultivate it with pansy, now can they survive together? Ordinarily speaking, yes. Both of them will survive in the same bed. Yet, once we grow them separately, we will find that there is a tremendous decorative value of pansy on one side, poppy on the other side, meaning thereby that creation of beds is on the basis of variability in color, variability in durability, as well as variability in production. Then we find sometimes if we want to maintain a bed for a longer duration, in that case we have to cultivate those plants whose growth cycle actually is much longer, that means which we normally refer to as long duration cycles. For example, if we try to grow dahlias, we find that once we plant dahlia in the month of March, by the month of December it will still survive. On the other hand, if we sow pansy, we sow it in the month of October or November, and in the month of May we have to harvest it and replace it with another flower. That means creation of beds is governed by such factors also. Then we find that once we try to create within a bud a mixture of these, that means we want to mix up ornamentals together in the same bed. Now here we have to mix them up on the basis of characterization. That means we can grow in the first row dwarfer plants and in the last row taller plants, as you can visualize here. You will find that in such combinations we try to cultivate those plants which have a perennial cycle, that means which survive for longer durations in the back rows, and those plants which have a shorter duration in the front rows, so that we can replace them with the others while as the perennial remain consistently in the same area. Then after such categorization has been carried out and the lawn has been prepared properly, now question arises, where from should we start the developmental pattern? Here we have one fundamental requirement, that is creation of what is referred to as a nursery. That means an area in which we can cultivate or we can sow those plants or those seeds which we need to cultivate in a specific period. And in this nursery, as you can visualize, we have bed creation. That means we have separation of segments of that area, and in each segment we can sow seeds of a specific variety, so that once they mature we can transplant them as per our desires, as per the needs of the particular garden or particular location. That means in a nursery, once the seeds have been sown, we have to monitor them as long as we find that the developmental pattern as well as the maturity of the seedling has reached a stage where it can be transplanted to the main field. And then once we see this, this transplantation is also to be monitored systematically. Now here, the question arises, can we maintain a nursery for whole year, or can we maintain a nursery for specific durations? Here two options are. One, a nursery can be maintained almost for 12 months. That means wherein in that nursery we can cultivate ornamentals of different types during different seasons of the year. Or if we are trying to cultivate them for two distinct seasons, that is winter annuals and summer annuals, in that case we have to maintain nursery for only two distinct seasons. That is referred to as spring nursery and summer nursery. Now in that nursery, the concept is to cultivate only those plants which can be maintained as well as cultivated for spring duration, and bypass them in those areas where we have only one seasonal cultivation. However, once we maintain the spring nursery, it is to be followed by a summer nursery. Now in these cases, we find that the survival pattern of a seedlings or survival pattern of a plant as such is only maintained if the status of whatever requirements a plant has. That means nutrition, that means irrigation, that means specific shade as well as specific sunlight is available throughout the season. It has been seen that if a nursery is constantly kept in shade, we find that the productive potential of the seedlings in that case almost always gets depleted. On the other hand, if we keep a nursery throughout the year in sunlight, the same features have been seen. Reason is that every plant at some stage of its life cycle, that is when it is in the seedling stage, when it is mature, when it is in the flowering stage, or when it is actually producing seeds and fruits, it has different requirements. That is why it has been seen that nursery should be in that area where both conditions, that means sunny condition and shady conditions, are regularly available throughout the season. And this can be observed in the nurseries that you can see. In each nursery, the creation is based on other two factors. One, what type of soil is there. Second, what type of irrigation pattern is available. Now, ordinarily, every plant, whether it is tropical, whether it is temperate, whether it is alpine, subalpine, has a fundamental habitat requirement that is governed by the soil itself. We find that if a plant is tropical, it requires soil type of one kind. If a plant is temperate, it requires soil type of another kind. This means that when we create a nursery in a tropical area, we have to select a soil type. And if we create a nursery in a temperate area, we need another type of soil. And then once we create these nurseries, other fundamental requirement is irrigation pattern. Technically speaking, irrigation is simply to provide water to a plant. However, we are talking of sowing seeds, we are talking of sowing rhizomes, we are talking of sowing of the bulbs. In that case, irrigation pattern is essentially required from the day we try to start sowing to the day we try to transplant these. That means in a nursery one must have continuous irrigation pattern governed either by natural availability of water or by artificial creation of irrigation centers. Then question is, once we try to add irrigation or provide irrigation to these seedlings which are developing, what type of nutrients should be applied? Are these nutrients required by the seeds? Are these nutrients required by the seedlings? Or are these nutrients required by the plants in its mature stage? Now it has been seen that in every aspect of plant growth, whether it is a seed, a seedling, a mature plant, it has a requirement of different types of nutrients. That means once we try to grow seeds or sow seeds, at that case we have to provide one type of nutrient. And then once the seedlings start maturing and they are immediately to be transplanted, at that case we have to provide them another irrigation. This is important because that irrigation is actually facilitating these seedlings to absorb moisture so that along with that moisture they absorb nutrients, and this absorbed nutrient provides their survival in the transplanted conditions. Then in the transplant conditions, we have not to provide them any nutrition unless and until the developmental pattern of a seedling is normal. That means we find once we transplant seedlings, they show slight drooping of the foliage. As you can see here in the transplanted seedlings, they are showing droopings. This drooping actually refers their partial adaptability. But as soon as the foliage, that is the leaf, becomes erect, that means the plant has got established. At that stage, we can reprovide nutrients under transplant conditions. This essentially is the fundamental aspect of providing the required nutrients to the plant at different stages of its development. Now, once these things have been established, question arises how one can maintain this particular aspect of what is referred to as the herbal garden or sometimes as an ornamental garden. In this case, one can either govern development of almost any and every plant throughout the season, or one can provide a natural pattern of adaptability or natural pattern of suitability of the plant to the habitat conditions. And that is why we find that wherever a garden has been created, that garden has characterized or characterizes or characters which actually are referred to as specific characters of specific garden. Sometimes one can see garden for purely tulips. Sometimes one can see gardens for dahlias. Sometimes one can see garden for cannas only. Sometimes one can see gardens for herbals only. Now, question is, if we divide the garden into subsections, what are the factors governing this? In this case, one basic factor that has been accepted universally is that if we try to cultivate one plant or one particular type of ornamental that has only its one basic requirement, that is its commercial value. On the other hand, if we try to cultivate many of them in the same field or in the same garden that is actually related to the domestic usage or pure ornamental usage of these plants. On the basis of these characters, we find that at present, whosoever tries to create a garden or a lawn or a commercial garden, in that we find that subsections are created. Ordinarily, these subsections are labeled as section A labeled as rosary, section B as herbal, section C as bulbous, section D as the rhizomatous, and automatically in these sections they try to maintain whatever different type of the plant they grow. And this in turn has been seen to be much more productive in terms of one specific type of the plant, as well as in terms of commercial value of each of these plants, as can be seen in these sections. This essentially is considered to be one of the fundamental concepts of improving productivity of floriculture as well as maintaining its commercial value, not at the regional levels, but sometimes at national levels and sometimes even international levels. One can quote an example of Holland, which has an international status in almost all the bulbous plants that they trade and cultivate commercially in almost every part of that country. On the other hand, we see certain countries, they try to actually import ornamentals from different countries because their developmental pattern, their commercial cultivation, as well as their maintenance of whatever ornamentals they have has been seen to get depleted with constant exploitation of these. If one creates a garden like this, he can maintain it for as long as he wants, or he has an option of recreating this garden after analyzing different parameters, different properties or different drawbacks of the garden. This is sometimes referred to as rejuvenation of an established herbal garden. In this case, the garden that is already working properly can be either abolished fully or recreated on the basis of whatever resources are available. In this case, ordinarily it has been seen that recreation sometimes is fruitful in modifying the structure of the garden, or sometimes actually helps in adding whatever new options are available in the vicinity or from commercial sources. On the basis of these, it has been seen that the cultivation of an ornamental, either in the form of a group or in a commercial scale, can not only make a particular locality fruitful, but sometimes whosoever creates it can also use it for commercial purposes. With this lecture, I say goodbye to you all, and we will continue in the next lecture as to how one should create or initiate the preparation of a suitable, commercially useful herbal garden. Thank you.